Welcome back. I'll call this chapter Vancouver 2 / the questions. Now, after I had worked up the Big Bend that summer and tried to go to grade 13, which was a failure for me, I went through that in my last chapter. I got a letter back from the Department of Highways boss that I'd had up at the Big Bend Highway. He told me to go to Vancouver to check in at the North Van location branch, and they would send me to Duncan to be a rodman, Duncan on Vancouver Island. Now, that one thing in my life, there's a couple of things that really, when you're young like that, that really change your life. And that was probably, that one there, the biggest one, was that they didn't send me to Duncan. That changed my life completely, or I would never have gotten the music business. Another one is I didn't marry Lynn Swallow, which I would have stayed working as a draftsman. I might have stayed sort of in the music business, but I really wouldn't have, probably as good. And the third thing that was the biggest mistake in my life was going to Calgary to record my second album and not going to Nashville with Andy DiMartino, who produced my first, who was a master producer, and he knew how to manipulate record companies. And that was the stupidest thing I ever did, was not go to Nashville and record an album with him, my second album, and get signed by Bruce Allen or some management company to manage me. Anyway, that's another story. So anyway, I went to Vancouver on the bus, packed up my stuff, left my home in Sicamous, and I went down and stayed at Finlayson's house again, where Neil and Reed and Lloyd, Uncle Andy Vera and Uncle Roy lived. Okay, and then, so I went over to report over in the morning. I don't know how I got there. I guess they probably drove me over. I went there and reported on the Monday morning to see about going over to Duncan to work. And Norm Hester was the location branch boss, and he said, "Oh, well, we decided we're going to keep you here." After he interviewed me a bit, he said, "We need someone in the office here to help out because we're really busy." And location branch was supposed to travel all over British Columbia doing different jobs, but these people, there was a lot of jobs around the Lower Mainland, so they mostly worked out of there was two little huts. When you go over the second narrow bridge, there's a roundabout that you can take to go into 3rd Avenue in North Van, and there used to be a big Department of Highways building, and there was a beautiful building with all rock foundation, and there was two little side buildings, and I worked in one of them. And anyway, so they told me that I could start there, and I reported for work, and then they said, "Well, we need someone in the office," which was right up my alley because drafting is all about drawing. Back in those days, I drew all the plans by hand. You had to do math, though, to plot out all the parts. But I loved the artwork because I liked artwork in school. I used to draw cartoons and planes and boats and biology. I loved biology. And so anyway, I loved that, and being in the office, rainy Vancouver. So anyway, there was an old draftsman worked in there, and for the life of me, Smitty, I think his name, I can't remember his name, but he was a really nice guy. So I went back after they told me I could work there, and Andy Vera said that I could board at their house for so much a month. I don't know what she charged me, pretty cheap, because I only made $250 a month back then, so it was $80 a month or something. And she used to, Norm Hester was my boss, and a guy named Tranfield, he was boss of the big building. The old draftsman, I wish I could remember it. He was such a great draftsman. He used to had a cigar hanging out of his mouth all the time, and he'd leave these big wooden matches to light it. And he'd come to work in the morning. You could smell booze on him. But he worked hard all day, that guy was. And at lunchtime, he'd out that door in he had a little English Morris car, not a mini Morris, but some other kind, I forget what they're called. Anyway, he'd whip up to the Linwood Hotel, and he'd drink his half an hour. I went up there once with him, but when I went back to work, I didn't feel like working. And he'd go up there and drink all his lunch hour, liquid lunch, and then he'd come back and work all afternoon. But he used to light those big wooden matches in the room. And I smoked in those days, too. My boss didn't smoke. He used to walk in the room and go, holy God, there's smoke in there. And if you ran your finger down the window, the windows were just brown. And anyway, the guy was a fantastic draftsman, and he taught me a lot of tricks about it. And I loved drafting. I used to get a little screwed up trying to do the math part because we had to use slide rules, and we used a facet machine for adding, subtracting, but I did a lot of cross sections. I drew all the plans up for the Cypress Bowl, the hill or the road that goes up to the ski hill. I drew all those plans, and I drew all the plans for the Hope Slide too. And then I did a lot of the freeway interchange plans, and I remember a couple of times when the crew would not. Nobody would show up for the crew, then I'd have to go out with the crew, but not very often. But I remember hiking up Cypress Bowl with the crew when we were surveying up there. Man, we drove up the mountain at some old road, and then we got up. It must have taken us an hour of hiking to get up the mountain to the line. And then all day long, you'd hold this big rod. It was raining like crazy. We had to wear rain gear. And the guy that had the level would stay on line, and me, the rod man, I'd have to go climbing through the bush, taking shots all the way down with this great big rod that's about 16 feet high or something. And, the terrain up there is terrible. And I'd go down, you probably take about 10 or 15 shots down one side of the line, then you come back up, and then you climb up the other side doing the same thing. Then you go on about 25 feet and do the same thing again. So that was a horrible, horrible job. Anyway, most of it was in the office, so I sat in the office and drew all the little points out that people did that with, and then I connected all the lines and inked them all in. I'm trying to see if I can get a hold of some of my old plans. But it was all hand lettering, and I could ink in all the buildings, color them in. It was just a great job. And then I actually I took a test and studied for it to become level 2. Whatever they called it. I was a level 1 beginner, I guess. It wasn't drafting, it was level 2, so you could be a level man. But I flunked that thing. The math got to me a bit. I should have studied harder, I guess, but by that time I was getting in bands and everything. The questions were getting started. So we used to go to this restaurant in North Van called the Tomahawk Restaurant. It's still there, apparently. They had the greatest hamburgers and everything, and they actually Brian Adams worked there he probably working there when I was drafting in North Van. I rode to work at first when from Andy Vera's place with the guy that was from Sycamoose named Jim Reimer. He was actually Donna's boyfriend, who for a while, apparently Donna told me that when Shane came to the drive-in in Salmon Arm, I made such a fuss about it because it was my favorite movie that Dad made Donna take me with them, her and Jim in the car to see the show. Good Lord, how horrible. I was such a spoiled brat, my Donna, poor Donna. Anyway, I went to see Shane. And then staying at my aunt's house, she used to make these horrible lunches. Every day the same lunch. It was like some kind of prem or something in a sandwich. I used to call it dog food sandwich. It was like dog food cut, like probably prem or pram or whatever that. And then, but the only thing good about it, she made these sort of chocolate squares with marshmallows in them. And because I always ate at the office there. So anyway, I finally, after riding with Jim Reimer, I bought a 1964 Chevy from Duick on Broadway. Man, what a beautiful car. It was, I think, 2-door hardtop with, I think a 2-door or 4-door hardtop. Might have been a 4-door hardtop. brown interior, and it was a cream color. Boy, I loved that car. It was a 283. I wish it would have been a 327. But anyway, I had a room in Finlayson's house in the basement. They had a piano there, but I don't remember playing it much. But Reed was still living there. He was working as a flagman or something, or working on paving crew. I remember he used to come home. He was so sunburnt and suntanned and thirsty. They used to have to take salt pills even. It was so hot working with paving in the summer. That's the only time they can pave. And I don't remember. I had a little bedroom made out part down in the basement, but Neil never ever tried to go after me again, except for the time when I was 11 or something. But me and Neil got along great. We used to sit around and talk about traveling, and he was a smart guy. I liked Neil. I always did like Neil all my life. We did a lot of things. We even went up Shuswap Lake once in a canoe and camped up there, but he never tried anything on me. I think he always kind of hoped that I would be a bit gay or something, which I'm totally not. But I like Neil as a friend. He's a great friend of mine. And, we went up to Shuswap once in a canoe and camped out on the beach, and we had a lot of fun. He probably wished I would have went. Him and his friend, this Dennis Fulcher, or he used to call himself Dennis Williams sometimes, they both worked at Standard Oil, but they dated girls too. And they were neat. They were quite a bit older than me. They worked at the Marine Building downtown, that really nice building for Standard Oil. And Lloyd was a car salesman, and he later on became a DJ, disc jockey for the radio. I remember him up in Prince George interviewing me when I had Holiday in Hollywood out. So he worked in the radio business for many, many years. And then I heard eventually he went back to car salesman, and then he got Crohn's disease, and he died now. But anyway, Neil and Dennis, I heard stories about them going to San Francisco in later years and, dating young guys or something, taking, like hooker guys or something. I don't know. I saw Dennis Fulcher I actually had a job playing piano in a gay bar once downtown, that just because I needed the money, of course. It was very interesting. My girlfriend, Robin, at the time, she would go in the bathroom and say, "Good Lord, it's full of guys." And all these guys would come in. One guy would be dressed like a girl and one guy like a guy. And they would sit at the piano bar. It was a weird gig. One guy used to tip me cocaine. And anyway, the bartender was a guy that told me he used to be married, but he went gay. It was an interesting place. So I was never gay, though. It just doesn't interest me at all. But it was that's where I saw Dennis Fulcher years later, and he had a guy with him called him a boy toy, but he was drunk, and we phoned Neil in the middle of the night. This is years and years later, but anyway, that's when I started going to the White Spot. Boy, I loved the White Spot, and I used to drive my '64 Chevy down there every night, and I had a hard time meeting anybody in Vancouver. It was very hard. There was nobody. It's a really hard place to break into. So I mostly hung around with the people from Salmon Arm. I used to talk to this little waiter guy at White Spot when I went down there, but I never actually became friends. But I used to go down, drive my car around. There's a lot of guys driving nice cars. But I couldn't seem to meet anybody at all. And I used to come home at Christmas time on the train. It was a lot of fun. We'd get on the train and party all the way home at night. You could smoke on the train then. And there'd be a lot of people from Salmon Arm and Sycamoose going home, too, for the Christmas parties. And then we'd drink all the way up there on the train, smoke and party and talk about, old days. And Uncle Bert was in Sycamoose, so he was like Mr. Party Guy. And I always liked being around him and seeing everybody. We used to go around Sycamoose looking for parties. And then I remember, we used to go, actually Neil took me to the steam baths down on Hastings. That was probably all gay people in there, but I was so stupid I didn't even have any idea. And he never touched me or even talked about stuff like that. I don't know, maybe he just liked looking at me. Who knows? Anyway, I was so dumb I didn't know. It was just like something to do. It was, you go down, sit in the steam bath, have a good steam bath, go back home. We used to go out for spaghetti after at this Mario's on Broadway sometimes, and I got so drunk one time I passed out into my damn spaghetti. But we used to talk about travel. You see, I was so stupid I didn't realize maybe he was sort of keen on me, but nobody ever touched me at the steam bath. I didn't even think there were gay people, but probably were. That's how stupid I am. Anyway, I mostly partied with the Salmon Arm Gang in Vancouver. Probably giving you too much information, but who cares? That's my life. I know what I am, so I'm not. It doesn't matter what anybody tries on me. I know what I am. I like women lots. I like women a lot, and I always did. Anyway, I'm going to do a chapter on my sex life later. Partying with the Salmon Arm Gang, I did a lot of that with the people like, Lynn Swallow ended up being down there, and Ida Whitaker and the Brown Boys. The whole gang I knew up in Salmon Arm. So we used to have a lot of parties. I got pictures of me with Lynn Swallow. I remember trying to get into her pants so many times, but she would never let me. I remember struggling with her. Jesus, I did that with a lot of girls. Anyway, Kim Sherwood ended up being down here in Vancouver also. So he lived down here, so him and me used to hang out a little bit. So I sort of started meeting people when I was still working at Department of Highways, and Kim lived in the Imperial Towers for a while, which is that big high building down on Beach Avenue, and so I think they call it Vaseline Towers now, full of gay people. But I lived in I lived in Beach Towers later years in my life. But anyway, I remember standing on the balcony. They had real skinny balconies. I remember us drinking up in the apartment one New Year's Day. We got drunk up there, and the balconies were only about a foot wide. You stand out there and hold on, look down about, I don't know how many floors he was up, about 30 floors, 32 floors, I think. Anyway, we all went down and went polar bear swimming, ice cold water. And, we used to go to the PNE, of course. And I seen, the Battle of the Bands playing there and all that. That was kind of fun. And I used to go out to UBC. They used to have dances out there. So I always was around dances. And there was another club called the Dance Land that was down on downtown. I can't remember, I think it was on Hornby and Georgia or something. But I remember going upstairs there and watching bands too. And then I liked jazz bands at the time. There was the Blue Horn it was on Broadway. Downstairs, I think that's the one. There was one other one, too. I used to like jazz music. I loved Jimmy Smith, the organ player, and he didn't come from Vancouver, but they used to have Izzy's in Vancouver. I went there, and I went to the Cave. I saw Wayne Newton at the Cave, Jerry Lee Lewis. I saw Buddy Rich. Who else now? Ray Charles. The Cave was the greatest. I'll do a little thing about the Cave later. And I went to the Bunkhouse, which was another club downtown. I saw John Hammond, the blues guy there, and Jose Feliciano with his dog on stage with him. He was a blind guy. And that's the same era that I met the Rolling Stones and the Coasters and Merrily and the Turnabouts. But I'll go into that with the questions when I do that one. And I also auditioned with my drums for Little Daddy and the Bachelors, who had Tommy Chong in that band from Cheech and Chong, but I never got that gig, so that's when I ended up getting into the band with the questions. So I'm going to continue on in just a second.